but something else that shows that you understand perspective. So something that's from imagination, because really, so illustration is two things: being able to see and draw, and then being able to draw from the imagination. And that's why perspective drawing gives us a way to draw accurately something that's, built environment that's square, that, or even natural environments too sometimes have elements of perspective, right? But you'd want to be able to show them that you can both see it and draw it accurately, that you understand what you're seeing and how to put that down, and then something that's out of your imagination, that you can have a lot of fun and create some imaginary world, right? And if you have time, one that's very, accurate looking, and one that's distorted and playful and fun, and just wow, if you've got time, because all your other stuff is really strong and good, right? Have you been able to finish most of the required pieces yet?
No, we haven't had time.
So unfortunately, you only have one exam, and so you can really spend a lot of time this week. I hope get some time off work, maybe.
Well, I have 3 exams, but then
I
have 2 days off, Thursday, Friday, and I only work Tuesday and Saturday, and I still get to. I don't start school again on Monday, so next Monday.
So this week is an important week for anybody working on a portfolio.
Yeah.
So I know it feels like, a holiday, but really, if you want to get into that school this year, the more you can work on your portfolio, the better. There's a lot of, I think you've got a lot of talent, but there's a lot of really talented young people. It's amazing. Some of this stuff. Some people have been sending me their portfolio images that want to apply to some of the same programs that you do. It's like, wow, there's some talented people out there. Beautiful. It's so neat to see. I love my job. I get to see all these beautiful works. But this perspective is where people tend to be weak. Especially people who are really good at drawing, like those organic forms. This is the one area. Although I find like the architecture students, they usually pick this up pretty well. Interior design, not as much, because I think interior designers tend to be a little more, I don't know, of the creative type, not necessarily as structured thinking. All right, so what we're going to start with is we're going to pick the horizon line. So that's going to be, so if your page is, so we got the one page on one side here, right? So let's say this is your page. And we're going to want to be able to put let me draw that a bit bigger. So here's your one page on one side, right? Nice and big. And so we're going to make your drawing on this page. Normally, and if you look at my drawing board, you can see that there's like marks off on the side. I'm drawing on my board a lot. So in making a perspective, always try to make it that it's fills your page well, but your vanishing points, if it's a 2-point, are going to be well off the edge of the page. So that's one thing I see a lot of students do, that they try to get the vanishing points on their actual drawing page. It's going to be distorted if you try to do that. So you always want to have a bigger piece of paper or a bigger board. Where they also the thing that we did in the object drawing, where we drew the lines past the object to make it look, it should look like it could eventually meet a vanishing point. So we're going to actually use a vanishing point this time. So we want to pick where the horizon line is, and we'll use a natural eye level again. So it'll probably be somewhere in the middle of your page for your horizon line. You're going to use that drafting triangle there, or sorry, this set square or T-square, I should say, to draw a nice horizontal line across the middle of the page. Depends on whether you're doing a high view or a low view where this would be on the page, but middle is often a good place. And then we need you to choose a scale to use. So there's some rulers there. We're not going to use a scale ruler. We'll just use a regular ruler. And probably the clear one is nice because you can see through it, right? So maybe we could pick that what would fit on your page as a height. We need to pick an eye height. So this is the horizon line. And then we're going to draw that ground line. So we want to measure down 5 units to the ground line. Now, how big is that going to be if we make it inches? Is it going to be too big on your page?
It's like right around here, so it's like almost close to.
So maybe, so it ends up, but does end up on your page. So what we could do is we'll make the front edge look like it's, the picture plane will be in the front edge. So it's like we're looking through a big glass window and drawing what we see behind it. Okay? So that should work then.
So right here?
Yeah, so measure down 5 inches and draw a horizontal line. Okay? So I'm going to make mine twice as big. So mine's going to be 10. This is how my teacher in college said we should do it. But you will notice a lot of people do it the way you saw in that handout, the projection I was doing, that they'll start with the wall at the back and project it forward. So we're going to start at the front. And this way you always know it's going to fit. So this is the ground line. And the convention is to draw the ground line and the horizon line a little bit thicker. Nice strong line. Okay? So because once you get drawing, there's gonna be a lot of lines that get confusing. Now I asked you to bring a bunch of different colors. Did you?
Yes.
Good. So this is one thing we can do to make it make more sense and not be confusing, is that we can pick different colors for different items. So you might want to, a very common thing is to draw the grid in blue.
Okay.
And then maybe use red for some of the objects that we're planning. And then we don't switch to black until we've found where the object is, because we're going to draw it as if everything's see-through. Like everything's acrylic boxes or something, right? Okay. Kind of like we did for the object drawing too, right?
Right.
So it's a very common in perspective, it's like drawing a wireframe. And whether you're drawing on a computer program or drawing by hand, it's like everything is see-through. Okay, so we've measured 5 units down. And I want you to actually measure the little, make the little tick marks. So every inch you're going to draw a little tick mark. So quite common in interior design, for example, they might use every 1/4 inch equals a foot. It's very common. In this case, it means every inch equals a foot. Pretty easy ratio. If you were drawing a huge thing, like, I don't know, you wanted to do a landing base on the moon, you'd use a different scale that suits something that's huge, right? Like, I don't know, every tick mark is a meter or something, right? All right, so we have that. And now we're going to draw these marks across the ground line. Okay? So we're going to draw it. So you're going to draw every inch, you're going to make a little tick mark. Trying to get that in straight view. That is confusing. There we go. All right. So this is considered a 1-point perspective, right? And it's always easiest to learn 1 point first before we tackle 2 point. Now, it can be confusing though, or, well, 1 points can be kind of boring. So as an illustrator, I like to use them because they're fast.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things with illustration, you need to get a job done quickly. And so if you can do a 1 point and make it look interesting, it's good. So one of the ways to make a 1 point look interesting is don't pick a vanishing point that's dead center. That's boring. Unless you want, you know, a very symmetrical kind of image. There might be times when you do, right? So, but we generally avoid that and we put it off to one side a bit. And then we will plan to have our perspective. We try to pick a 1 point perspective if we know there's some overlap in the design, there's something I'm peeking through to. We want to make sure it stays interesting somehow. So we're going to pick a vanishing point. So that's my vanishing point over here. And this would be to say that I'm standing right in front of here. I'm standing off to one side a little bit. Okay? So that vanishing point is our eye. That's if we're standing right here with our feet here in front of this. And so here we're standing. Actually, no, I'm standing right here. Okay? My eyes are on that horizon line and I'm right in front of it, actually. So actually I'm here. There. That's where it'd be. All right? So I'm off to one side of this room or the space we're looking at. And my eye, I have one eye closed and I'm looking. So, which is also not normal. We have two eyes, but a perspective view is like we're closing one eye, okay? Just like when you notice when we're drawing and sight measuring, we have to close one eye. All right, so there's vanishing. Now you already probably know what to do, right? Because you saw the projection, and you're going to use the ruler. So to make a good grid, we want to use a ruler, and we want to be precise. We want sharp tools. So you've got a nice blue pencil there, and is it sharp? Okay. There should be a sharpener just over on that little skinny cabinet with the white drawers. I think it might be sitting on top, is it? Is there a sharpener there? Or in one of the drawers? So we need to be precise where we're going to make mistakes. And it's going to end up, and it's amazing, like a millimeter off. Where is the sharpener? So when you're doing a perspective drawing, you want to be as straight and precise as possible. And one of the things that you'll learn is how to be good at drafting. That when you're drawing, you want to try to keep your drawing tool right tight up against your ruler consistently. So something in drafting, we call it pencil error, that if you turn your pencil against your ruler at a different angle as you draw, you'll end up with a line that's crooked. And you might think, oh, well, so what? But in a perspective, imagining that grid where you have that diagonal line running through there, if you're not accurate in how you draw, something's not going to add up and it's going to look weird. And a little space, it might be a tiny millimeter on your drawing, but that actually means it could be a whole foot or more in the actual space you're drawing. So we want to try to be relatively neat and accurate when we're doing perspective drawings. And that's one of the great things about going to college, where you get a lot of good practice and training and discipline, and you learn by those mistakes too of oops, right? And you find out what suits you too as an illustrator. That maybe you'll find you're really precise and you love, I don't know, maybe medical illustration or technical illustration, or you might find, you're the editorial type who wants to do magazine covers and album covers and things that are, really creative and not precise. But I can see that you could be a very precise illustrator from what I've already seen you do. But you'll have to see what you'll end up enjoying. So it's really, the college experience is awesome because it exposes you to so many different ways of working. And sometimes what you might assume about yourself, you'll find after being exposed to other things that, like I started out being quite precise. And I can be precise, but I actually don't like to be. I found once I went to fine art school that I ended up really enjoying really loose and expressive stuff. It took me a while to break out of my controlled way because I went to design school first and did all this perspective drawing. It took a while to loosen up a bit. But yeah, and now I kind of choose, do I want to be precise or do I want to be loose and expressive? And I think it's great to be able to experience both extremes. And I think ideally as an illustrator, even though you're going to develop your style and become known for style, I think it's a good thing to explore different ways of working, different styles, and be versatile. Because it just helps you be more employed. You do want to watch, though, that you do have a style.
Yeah.
And it depends particularly on the type of illustrator you want to be, whether you want to be one of those people that's known for a style and hired because of it, or whether you're somebody who just wants to be employed and get whatever job there is. There's really different approaches there, right? Generally, you're going to develop a style and be known for it as a professional illustrator. But it is good to still be flexible, that you could do a range of things.
How is it that illustrators are able to get their own style? Because like every illustrator I see, all of their drawings look different. How is it that people are able to just kind of does that just happen?
I think it happens. I think it happens over time, and that's one of the things that's great about being in college, because it exposes you to different assignments and an opportunity to explore and learn and sort of find a style, right?
Yeah.
And it'll come naturally from you. Every designer, illustrator, artist has sort of a natural way about them. You'll discover what it is over time.
Because people do tell me that I have my own specific style, but I don't really think.
I see it. You're developing a style. Yeah. And you'll find it'll just develop while you're in college. And you don't necessarily need a style yet.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I interviewed Clara Liu, and she teaches at RISD, Rhode Island School of Design. Excellent art professor, and she writes for the Huffington Post with a column called Ask the Art Prof. It's a great opportunity to get some really neat ideas, to check her article out. But she was saying that as an undergrad, you want to show in your portfolio a willingness to explore, that you don't have a style yet. You're a sponge ready to learn and try different things, and it really shows that you're a good candidate for education. But by the time you graduate, though, you should consider, like, when you're first there, just learn, explore. Don't have any goal other than learning.
Right.
But by the time you're into your final year, you really want to start sort of looking at your work and develop a style, ideally, right? So that when you graduate, you've got a portfolio that says, this is me.
Right.
And you've got something to present, and so that potential employers or clients can say, yes, I like this look. I want to hire this person for that look. Almost the way models get hired for their look. You have your portfolio, right? And a graduate portfolio looks very different from an undergrad portfolio. Okay. So by the time you graduate, you want to have that style, and you want to know that you're producing and showing this kind of work, and that's what you're going after. And you'll find out through your education what you really like, what area of illustration you're interested in. Or sometimes you can even have a portfolio that shows, here's this kind of work I do, and here's that kind of work I do. Or you can even have different portfolios for different things.
Right.
That you could have more than one style, so that you can show to, maybe you want to get some work that's in the more industrial sort of technical illustration. You might have your book of technical illustration. You might have your book of editorial illustration. You know, let's say you want to do the cover of the New Yorker, for example. You might have 2 different portfolios. So, but they'll teach you more about that when you're in college. And it's a good idea to talk to other illustrators. I really think if you could meet Michael Byers, he went to the program, one of the programs you're interested in, and he's a very successful illustrator now. And one of the things he did was that he as a student talked to other high-level professional illustrators out there, and he talked to them and he'd ask them questions, and they kind of be mentors for him. And he ended up really having a really rich experience as a student because of that. And then when he graduated, he was getting referrals. And you know, what a great thing, because people love to help students. So, and he learned more by kind of really putting himself out there. And he does have a very strong, distinctive style of his own now that he gets hired for. He's, you know, highly successful. So, but you know, you really have to keep your eye on the goal of being an illustrator. And he had a lot of support too through his family. So he said that he, when he graduated, he lived at home for I think 2 years because his mom wanted to ensure that he could get work in his profession rather than having to take a job to just pay the student loan. So the fact that he had some support from his parents to help pay for his education really helped him be successful, and the fact that they let him stay at home so that he could take illustration jobs, build his illustration career, instead of having to take whatever job he could get just to pay the student loan. So that's what a challenge, just a reality challenge, that you make sure you keep looking for work in your field when you graduate somehow. And he's done really well, and all he does is illustrate now. So yeah, and he loves it. It does awesome work. All right, so the next stage now is to create the grid. Now this is where people go wrong. Okay, is they try to put the finishing point on their measuring point on the same page, and the thing looks too deep, it looks weird. So one of the ways to create a good perspective, so this is going to be a guesstimate method. It's going to be based on the geometry of a square. So one thing that I find that's great about learning about perspective drawing, it helps inform our observational drawing too, and helps us get things to be more accurate. So if I look at a square, so remember we were talking before that if I draw a diagonal through a square, so we know that this is a 90 degree, right? And we know that if we dissect that in half, that we get 45 degrees in between there, right? So what we've got right now is we know this dimension right here, right? We've got one unit. So in this case, we're going to say it's standing for 1 foot, right? So we know this, we don't know that. We don't know the depth, right? So you see that this square would be here, and we want to figure out what's the foreshortening. So we don't know the depth. We can't take our ruler and measure it. That if I did that, let's try it. I'm going to measure my 2. I had 2, you have 1. And then I draw a line. If I draw it, do you see how that looks like a rectangle? That does not look like a square, right? So it's not the same. So what I often do if I'm just doing a guesstimate perspective, I know that if I look at a square at the height that I am, and we're both at the same height, that I'm going to get a really foreshortened look to that square if I'm looking at it on an angle. And what I find oftentimes this depth here is really so foreshortened that if I looked at it as a vertical, remember how when we sight measure?
Yeah.
And we sort of check what's the foreshortening by checking vertically. How high is this from front edge to back edge compared to the width? And it's oftentimes about a quarter of the width. That the height from front edge to back edge as a vertical is a quarter of the width, oftentimes. Between a quarter and a third, depending on how tall you are or how deep or small you want the perspective. So if you make the depth anywhere from a, well, I say 1/5 of the width, 1/5 to 1/3, it'll look good. Okay, so that's generally what typical foreshortening looks like. So let's see. So if I go half, quarter, and then we try it and we see, does that look good? Do I want that? And one of the things when we're starting at the front and going back, we know that the foreshortening gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, right? And it sort of speeds up as it goes back. So I don't want to start with something too small, or it's just going to be tiny, right? So you want to expect a little bit of distortion in the front, because that's normal anyway, and it feels believable because we do always have that when we're looking around. So I probably would not pick that. If I was starting at the back angle though, let's say we had started drawing like we saw in the handouts or the projection I had from the PowerPoint presentation there. If I'm starting at the back, I should start with a smaller percentage, right? Because as I come forward, it's going to get bigger. And if I'm starting at the front, I might want to start bigger, and because I know it's going to get smaller and smaller as I go back. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So what we might do is let's make it a third and see if that looks good, so that I don't mind having a bit of distortion at the front. But if my wall that I started with was at the back, I would start with the smaller increment so that it stretches and it looks decent. So I often find a quarter for this height is really good to give me a foreshortening that looks natural, okay? All right, so let's see. So you can actually measure it, or I usually just visually guess because I don't like being that precise anymore. But if I was going to measure it, so we're saying quarters of a third, be like that. So what is that? Third. That looks decent. All right, so that's going to be my first square. So we say that's going to be my first square. So I'm going to draw at the front a horizontal line using a third, and I sure hope that looks good. And sometimes, you know, you got to start drawing it to see if I like it. But knowing that we're starting right at the front of the page, I think it's going to end up being okay. So these are things that, you know, I've learned in experience that, oh, darn, that looks too deep, that looks bad. And you try to draw something in the foreground, if you're drawing it, it just looks awful. So now what I do is say, okay, I've estimated what does a square look like when I view it in perspective from the typical eye level that I am. And so I'm guesstimating a square. And so then what I do is I take an angle. I'm going to draw this angle in the perspective view. So I'm going to pick one of these squares that I just made, and I'm going to draw from front corner to back corner. So I got front corner on the right, back corner on the left, and I'm going to draw a diagonal. And I'm going to continue out all the way till it hits the horizon line. And that is going to be my measuring point. So MP for short, or measuring point. A good book that teaches this, it's used a lot in college, is written by Francis Ching. They almost use it as a textbook. It's been around forever, but it just works. So if you look up books by Francis Ching, he will teach you how to do this properly. Some perspective books show too much depth. Not every perspective book is good. There's unfortunately some, like, make sure if you're going to buy a book about perspective that you put some good money into it. So some of the books out there, I'm surprised, really show distortions and errors. So Francis Ching is always accurate. It's another one on my Amazon store. I usually load any of the good books in my Amazon store. The Complete Guide to Perspective, really a great book. It's got everything you want, from creating shadows to angles, everything. It's excellent, and it's really graphically laid out beautifully. It's really great examples. It's an expensive book. I think it's close to $200. It's got everything. It's excellent. I highly recommend it. Maybe you can try to find it used somewhere.
So is it a third up, and then you draw a line across?
Yeah. So what I did is I measured 1/3 of the width. Right. So I just broke the front edge into thirds, measured up vertically 1/3 of the overall width at the front edge, drew a horizontal line. So, and I would only use that depth if I'm starting at the front of my drawing, my page. If I did that at the back, if my wall where I was measuring was back here, it's smaller if you're starting at the back. So if I did it back here, it's going to be 1/4 or even 1/5. So these are good guesstimate rules. And like I said, this is, if I ever bother to draw a grid today as a designer, it's freehand like this. Otherwise, if I want something more accurate, I'm usually doing 3D modeling or some type of really accurate projection method. Like I use something that I learned in Germany called the turn chord method, but most of the time I don't bother. I just do this or completely just make it up. But I don't think I could make it up if I hadn't been trained. I had perspective drawing every semester at college.
Right.
Yeah. So. Okay, so can you guess what you're going to do once you get that? Are you still working on getting it?
Yeah, I'm trying.
Okay.
I'm having.
Do you need some help?
I'm good now. I just don't. It's really. I don't want it to like not be a third or too big. I don't want it to be too big. But.
Use your T-square, because if that is tilted, it's not going to work out. The grid, to make it work, it's got to be accurately drafted, or it's not going to line up. It's going to. So it's fun when I teach this in landscape department at U of G. We get 60 students in a class, and you know we go, okay, here's first stage, everybody do it. Here's second stage, everybody do it, and it still gets confused. And then we have to have 2 profs plus a TA. We start at either end of the room and work our way through. It's a lot of students to be learning this. And I used to have classes at Sheridan. We'd have anywhere from 15 to 35 students in a class. When I found if I had over 30, it was almost impossible for everybody to understand what they were doing, because I wouldn't have time to get around to everybody and make sure they understood. And so you would think, like, I teach this step by step, like at U of G, and people still don't understand it, even though we do it step by step, because some people just don't think this way.
Yeah, and then they get lost.
And they get lost, and then they're like, they missed a step, and they're like, what? So
Okay, so that.
let me have a look at what you're doing over there.
I think I got it right. Didn't turn off this line and go over, it's just not good. There we go.
Okay. Okay, so then that's not the right, that's not a third of this, so this is a third. Okay, you want this dimension here.
Oh,
Okay, that's too big. It already looks like it's not a square.
okay.
So a third of one of these. Okay, so what height is that? Okay, so yeah, you divide it as a third. So then you take that dimension. So what is that?
Oh, it doesn't look right to me. But
This is the way those marks are hard to see. How many 16ths is that? It's not 3/8. So it's one mark less than 3/8. 1, 2, 3/8. A little bit smaller. Okay. It'll look better. That's a little bit distorted. Okay. Okay, so then we pick any one of those squares, and you draw front edge through back edge all the way out. So it's the horizon, so it's extend that horizon. So if you find this ruler, but some people do, right? But some people, what they'll do with the T-square, they just flip it over if they're drawing the wrong lines, and then flip it back when they're wanting to draw.
okay.
All right. Great. So if any of you are watching this, there's other videos that teach you how to do this, from how to draw a room interior, lots of great stuff that the University of Guelph landscape students have followed for doing exteriors, and you can follow through how to do that and learn how to apply it for your own drawing. So these videos are available if you contact me at portprep.com, info@portprep.com. Tell me if you're interested in getting some private tutorial videos on different types of perspective drawing, and then you can pay a rental fee, and I send you the private link so that you can learn how to draw perspective. So I thought we were going to have a classroom full of people because there's so many people who wanted to work on their perspectives, but it's exam time. so we've got one student in my workshop today, but you know, and the girl that's here, I mean, she draws incredibly well.
But this was the one area where she wasn't strong. That's why she's taken time to come to a workshop. Otherwise, yeah, just work on that portfolio. But it's just such an important skill in portfolios for animation, really important, illustration, very important, architecture, interior design. You definitely want to be able to learn how to draw perspective. So, all right. So, do you know what you have to do next? You can imagine. I'm sure you can figure out what the next stage is. Yeah. Good. Good descriptive word there. All right. Yeah. And you make sure that you use that T-square against the edge. It stays horizontal. That when students try to do this freehand, it's just a mess. Like, yeah, make the grid by drafting it carefully. And then you can sort of freehand sketch over that if you want.
Yeah.
But if the grid's freehand, it's going to be wonky. Be careful to make sure that as you're moving that T-square that you're kind of holding it up against the edge so that it stays nice and, just not tilting on you, okay? And then when you're drafting, really be careful that you're crossing that line. Right? So what you're going to do is you're going to draw a horizontal line every time that diagonal that we drew to the measuring point crosses these fine lines or files that we drew to the vanishing point. So we're going to have to, it's a little hard to do on the board accurately. You can try. I don't have a huge T-square here. I guess I should get one. This used to be great. I would teach at U of G with this huge long piece of wood. Draw these like massive drawings and try to keep them straight. It's not easy drawing on a whiteboard. So I think it's angled already. Like my first line is crooked. You want nice, sharp, accurate lines that remain horizontal. Really try to make sure you're hitting that intersection accurately, or it's gonna, you'll notice that one square looks bigger, one looks smaller. So what's nice to get is the click leads in non-photo blue, because those are easy, you don't have to have, or like architects, they'll get mechanical pencils with a lead pointer. You can buy them in different colors. Fine point pens or micron pens in a fine point in different colors. Those are good to use. So this looks decent. I think it's a little bit distorted. It's like 1/4 is more accurate to vision for your foreshortening, but I find that it often looks too tiny to make a nice drawing. But it still looks reasonable. Like it doesn't look like rectangles. So oftentimes that artists will slightly stretch the perspective so that you can see things and things don't look too like compressed together. Or you pick a higher vantage point than 5 feet. So oftentimes architects will pretend everybody's 6 feet tall. So because then this stuff on the ground plane doesn't get all like squished and compressed together then. So it looks okay. It's slightly stretched, but it looks decent. And then as we continue to draw back and be able to draw into this space, it won't just be a sea of tiny little lines. So what I want you to do is draw to the end of that, and I want you to figure out, how do you keep that grid going? Because this is, some people get it right away and other people are completely confused. They have no idea how to continue the grid. So I want to see if you can figure out, now that I've drawn the last grid line, how do I make more? Because we want to make this big, deep space. So if anybody's watching on YouTube or on Google Plus, how do you make more? How do we draw back here? What would you do? What do you think? So what are we using as a measuring device?
Like the smaller? Do you go like 1/5?
No. We've already estimated once, so we're going to be consistent with that. It's something to do with that diagonal line. Oops. How did we measure? Now, so we first measured, we got this angled line by estimating what's the foreshortening of a square, right, in perspective. So and then we measured that as 1/3 of its width. So that was our first estimate. Then everything else is based on this diagonal line that is drawn up to the horizon line. So it's called a measuring point. What do you think we would do? So it's called a measuring point for a reason, right?
Yeah.
So what are we going to do?
Measure. I don't know. You wouldn't go from here because that would be more.
No. I think that we have to use this thing. We made this measuring point for a reason. We can use it again. So this is going to calculate our foreshortening for us, this measuring point. We found the measuring point by estimating what does a square look like viewed in perspective. How foreshortened is a square? So this is the estimate method. There's other methods where there's a specific measurement or angle. There's ways to calculate how far from the vanishing point is the measuring point. And Francis Ching, as well as the other book I mentioned to you, shows you how to do it in a measured way.
Right.
This is, we're just estimating. But either whether you measure and calculate where that is through well, basically you go down below here and you draw a 45-degree angle and it tells you where it is. But anyway, like I said, you'll probably learn that method of making a measured grid in college. We figured it out by estimating a square in perspective. We drew that diagonal up to the horizon line. Now we have the measuring point. And now we can keep using this thing to figure out our depths. So if we drew a diagonal like that, where would we draw the next diagonal so that we can make more grid?
The other one? No.
So you're getting there. All right. So do I have to tell you? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. I like for people to try to figure it out, because if you figure it out yourself, it stays in your head.
Yeah.
And we can see whether you really are grasping it or not. So once I show you, you're going to go, oh, yeah, of course. Or that's what I thought. Yeah. Okay. So we're not going to measure again. We're going to use the measuring point. And so from your ruler's not long enough. Okay, when your ruler's not long enough, you stick two rulers together like this. Or I could just borrow can I just borrow the I do measuring points. We're going to pivot off the measuring point just like I do the last horizontal grid line I drew. Okay. And draw a diagonal from there to that. Yeah. All right. And then what? Now what do you do? Now it's just the same as what we had done before. Right?
Yeah. So you cross the line, you find the horizontal line, and then just
so wherever that diagonal that we just drew crosses these lines that go to the vanishing point, that's where we draw more horizontal lines. All right, so where's my ruler? You get your T-square out and you keep drawing horizontal lines wherever that intersection is. Oops. I'm drawing crooked. All right, so when you go all the way to the end, and then what if you wanted to make more? What would you do?
Would you do the same again?
Yep. So if you wanted to make more, but you can see you don't need it all.
Yeah.
It's probably good enough. All right.
Okay.
Now, if you wanted a bigger space, let's say you want more space, but we've just got this sea of lines, right?
Mhm.
And you say, well, that's just crazy. I can't keep drawing all those little lines. What you could do is say, what if I draw every fifth line?
Okay.
So that I know now it's every 5 feet. So in that case, if or every 2 lines or whatever, so that you would say, okay, I'm going to make a bigger grid now. So it would mean that every second line, you might draw a grid line so that you can continue figuring out the depth of your space and where things are, but by using every second line. So you would draw another diagonal. So can you do that? Because there's nothing like doing it to make sure you understand it. And doing is what makes us remember. If we just are told something, it's very passive, it doesn't go in our brain and stay there. So if I want to do every second line, so I can keep my space going. And I just have to remember that it's every second line or every third or whatever, every 10 lines, whatever you want to do to be able to calculate the main space, but maybe not little tiny things in the space, right? Now we have to remember that those are now rectangles. They're not squares anymore. They're rectangles. So what I could do if I want to make sure I see them as squares, erase out center portion. Right. So there we go. We made a grid. So you start to visualize the depth of that space, right? And what kind of space would you like to draw? So now you get to use some imagination. What do you want to make? Is it going to be a hallway? It's, I don't know, a grand hall. I don't know. It's an old castle.
That sounds good to me.
It's a bridge. It's, I used to design shopping malls. So it would be, it's somebody's bedroom. I don't know.
The grand hallway sounds good to me.
A grand hallway with arches and everything.
Sure.
Oh, cool. And a sloped ceiling at the top, maybe?
Yeah.
So we could learn how to do all those things?
Yeah.
Cool. And then maybe you're gonna have an elegant woman dancing or something added into that. Or whatever. So that, you know, you could actually make this be part of your portfolio.
Yeah.
That, okay, I constructed this and then I made this really cool story or something happening inside that space, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so then we have to create verticals. So if it's a grand hall, maybe it's got, you know, archways at regular intervals, right? So we want to put some vertical and some end space to this. So you have to decide how long and how deep do you want this space to actually be. Okay, so let's see. So it's going to be tall. We want it to be a really tall space if it's a grand hall, right? So we're going to go back to the only place we can actually measure with our ruler is along the ground line at the bottom, right? And the side panel, that's right beside that. So right on this thing called the picture plane. All right, so how tall? I want this to be a really tall space. I hope it fits on your paper. You might need to glue another piece of paper on. So we want it to be a really wonderfully grand space. So you're going to have to measure, draw a vertical line and measure up. So, wow, I think we're going to want it to be quite a tall space. We got 5 feet. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's not a bit of money. 10 foot is not high. Like that's just a really nice height in somebody's ceiling in a home, but grand hall.
I got 10 feet too.
Yeah, I think you want a piece of paper on there on top. So a grand hall is at least 15 or 20 feet tall, don't you think?
Yeah.
A nice, high, elegant space or something, right? So now you get to be an architectural designer too for this space. Imagine some wonderful space, and then what kind of really cool things or characters could you put inside that? So yeah, this can be a great piece for your portfolio, but to use this opportunity so that this time isn't just learning, it's doing a piece for your portfolio. And so this would be the construction. So typically for perspective, we do a rough construction first. And what some students do, they'll make a grid and they'll keep the grid and reuse the grid for other things as long as it applies to what they're drawing. I have to make a grid for whatever I'm doing because every situation is sometimes different. But what they'll teach you often in school is they'll have you make a proper grid, you get it laminated, you keep it for forever, and you just keep tracing over it with your tracing paper. Do you want some scissors to trim off your torn bits, or? There's scissors over in that cabinet. But a grid can always be reused if you keep it. Not necessarily job for job, so it saves you time. So, but what we'll do is do you want a piece of tracing paper to draw on top, or are you just going to draw your whole space right on your page? You can decide.
It's hard to say.
So,
I
have a roll of bigger stuff here. So what is a good idea to draw your grid strong enough that you can see through onto tracing paper. So a lot of like I said, the students usually in college, they'll make a proper measured grid and draft it in black, laminate it so you can reuse it. So you could even draw on it with markers and then wash it off too, right? So it's a handy thing to use. So we're going to create this tall space, and you're going to have a rough construction. You'll end up doing a trace over or a transfer somehow for your final, drawing where you end up doing your beautiful. Your line work is so nice. So and we can use some of those things that
that Garth taught us about line work, right? What's if it's going to be a line drawing, what's in front is thicker, sort of atmospheric perspective. What's in the back, it's thinner. Plus, you're going to pick the direction of light. That lines on the highlight side will be thinner, lines on the shadow side are thicker. Or you might decide to do a tonal drawing or a rendering of some type, right?
Yeah.
So you'll have your rough construction, that could be part of your portfolio perhaps, as well as your final piece, depending on what you choose to put in your portfolio, what seems right to you. So, yeah, so what I like to just give people the skills, and then you bring your imagination to this, right? So you're going to imagine what you want this space to be, and then I'll just help you learn how would you draw that. Okay, you can even stop and sketch in your sketchbook for a minute to just figure out what would you like this to look like, which I think would be a good idea. So that, because I think it's so important that anything you create is coming from your imagination, not mine.
Okay.
So all I did was said the idea grand hall, and the grand halls tend to be tall, right?
Yeah.
So let's have you stop and do a little bit of sketching in your sketchbook so you could explore what would you like that to look like? And then we'll go about learning the skills to draw that in perspective. I think that's a great way to work anytime you're creating something. If you figure out just from a little thumbnail sketch, what do I want? And then well, I want that, but I don't know how to draw that. But then you know what you want, so then you go and find, how do I draw that?
Right.
And there's loads of free resources too on YouTube of how to draw blah, 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 right? How to draw a barrel arch, how to draw, a cathedral ceiling, and you'll probably find something out there. Okay, so do some sketching, and because that's called what we call problem-based learning. If there's something you want to create, it's in your imagination, and you kind of get this excitement of, I want to draw that. Then there's a reason to want to learn how to do something. Where perspective drawing seem so boring otherwise. But if you get an idea that you want to visualize, then it gives you the drive to want to do it. And plus, it makes you remember it more too when you do learn it. If we're learning something just because we have to, it tends to not stay in our head.
Yeah.
And I think when it got more exciting for me doing perspective drawing was when I was allowed to design my own stuff instead of, my boss's stuff. And I found that I really started to get it and enjoy it and get faster when it was something out of my mind. And even after I was drawing for a lot of years, like I remember I was working in France for a while, and they hired me because I could do perspective drawings, not because I could speak French very well. I did learn a lot while I was there, and I had to work with a particular designer, and I was supposed to draw a perspective of his design, and by that time I'd been working for several years, so I was decent speed at it, but they still found me slow.
Yeah.
And then I was lucky to get assigned my own design project. I got to pick my own team from all their staff members. And then I was sketching perspectives, but out of my imagination, and it's so fast.
Mm-hmm.
When you're going directly from what you're imagining, using what you know about perspective. And then I remember the other guy I was working with, he was like, how come you're working so fast now? And I guess it's that immediate connection and the motivation that you feel and the excitement that you feel. It just speeds it all up.
Yeah.
And you end up creating something really great. So, all right, so let's have you come up with some neat ideas, and then I'll teach you how to draw.